right. Hey, everybody. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Austin Walker, and I'm the high school pastor here. And I am so glad that you're here. You may have seen earlier, just like two things before we dive into our passage tonight. Subtle plug. I've got my awakening face mask because winter chill is very, very, very close. We'll tell you more about that. I've got my hat, my awakening hat. Fortunately, it does fit my big old head. Barely. So like if I really get to preaching and a vein in my forehead pops, this hat might like cartoon style just like levitate. It's just because I'm really excited to be in our passage tonight. So that's the first thing. I'm really excited about Winter Chill. It is my favorite weekend of the year, and it is almost here. The second thing, got to go full on dad mode right now. Because of COVID numbers in our state and where things are going, we're not at a point where we're making any changes for programming, but I did want to let you know we are to a point where if we start seeing students who aren't sitting 2 spots apart, we have to start like contacting parents because we care so much about making sure that we are doing the best of our abilities to keep you safe. So right now, there's no shame. In fact, right now, I'm gonna pretend that I can't even see those of you who aren't sitting 2 seats apart. Go ahead and just fix it now. And then as we're kind of monitoring stuff, we don't have to put your name on a note card and contact parents, because as much as I love you and as much as I'm even gonna look this way just so that we can handle all of our business, if you're sitting 2 seats apart from everybody, go ahead and turn to 1 Kings 19. That's where we're gonna be. But we love you deeply. We care about you. We want you to be healthy. We don't want you to get COVID-19, much less when we're right in the middle of winter chill season or like any time, but especially tonight. So just know that's kind of our standard operating procedure moving forward because we care about y'all, because I don't want to get sick, and for all of the reasons. But we are going to be in 1 Kings 19. So if you have your Bible, that's the early part of the Bible. We're going to be diving into a really cool story that many of you may know. But I wonder, just as we're turning there, how many of y'all have ever had a moment where you're like, you know what? I just don't need this right now. This is not at all what I need right now. There may be somebody in your life where when you get a text message from that person, regardless of what's happened in your life, your whole body just like tenses up, and you know you're stuck with this thing where it's like, okay, this is not what I need right now. I can read this message and see what they're saying, but then I have to deal with it. So I could just ignore it, or I could read it, or I don't need this right now. Why did they have to text me? And you just don't know what to do. Maybe I'm the only one who has a few people in my life that are like that. When I see their notification pop up on the screen, it ruins my day. If I'm being honest, sometimes it ruins multiple days. But it's just like, I don't need this right now. Or maybe you've had a long day at school, it's stressful and life is crazy, and you walk in the door and you just need a little time to yourself. You just need time to breathe and be a person and not be like totally stressed by everything that you have. And you walk in the door and you're ready to get your favorite snack. Maybe for you, you're ready to grab that Capri Sun that you don't want to tell anybody you still love, but mom still buys them and it's awesome. And you're just excited for that. You're going home, you're ready for your moment of just zen. We're like, and you walk in the door, and the first thing you hear is, I cannot believe you didn't bring the trash out this morning. We have a trash can full of trash because somebody was too important to bring it down the driveway and put it by the road. And now what am I going to do with all this trash? Are you going to take it to the dump by yourself? Are you going to carry each bag by yourself? It's like, that's not what I need right now, Mom. When I was in high school, my senior year, I had quit the football team. They were not like sad about it. Actually, I moved from Mississippi. When I moved to Benton, I just chose not to play football. It was a whole other part of my testimony and God's leading. But one of my friends was on the football team, and he called me after practice, and he said, you will never believe what Coach did. I was like, I might. Try me. Like, let's find out if I won't. So-and-so, this guy that was in our math class, he said, he got hurt and started screaming. And Coach got up in his face, grabbed his face mask and said, you just take a lap, and sent him running. After practice, he went to the hospital and had broken his collarbone. If there's ever a thing that you don't need, it's to jog off a broken collarbone. That's not how your body works. There are all kinds of times where there's stress and there's things that are built up and there's chaos and tension, and to stay on brand, there's storms in our life and things just start to happen, and it's like, that's not what I need right now. The dangerous thing is, I think that sometimes, I know for me and maybe for you, there are times when we start to get stressed about our life, and then we think about our life with God, our life following Jesus, and we start to think like, man, it's not what I need right now. Like we know that we aren't really making the best decisions, and we don't know really what to do. Our life is really stressful, and we're trying to figure out how to manage all of this, and we expect if I go to God and I ask God what to do, he's gonna like just brute force smote me off the face of the earth. He's gonna remind me of all the sin in my life. He's gonna remind me of all the jacked up, messed up, screwed up stuff that I've done, and I don't need this right now. So we don't take it to God. We don't go to God. We ignore him, or maybe it's you start to realize that, man, it has been, what was the last month that I read the Bible? I probably need to do that. But if I start reading, then I'm going to stop reading, and then I'll be stressed, and I'll feel bad and guilty, and that's not what I need right now. We have a sin issue in our life, and we're afraid that God's going to call us to do something, or we start juniors and seniors trying to figure out what we're going to do after high school, and you're afraid that maybe God's going to send you to this school and the person that you have loved since you were 2 minutes old to that school, and so you just don't ask God because that's not what I need right now. I have enough going on in my life. So what do? What do we do when we get to a point that life is so crazy? We start thinking about our relationship with God, our life following Jesus, and really say, it's not quite what I need right now. Tonight we're in 1 Kings 19, and just to kind of set the stage for what's happening in this story, there's this guy, this prophet, which means like spokesperson of God. His name's Elijah. Everybody say Elijah. Okay, and later there's a guy named Elisha, different dude, same time period, but again, Elijah. Everybody say Elijah. Perfect, so proud of you. There's this guy named Elijah, and he's a prophet, and there's the king of Israel at this time. They've started worshiping these false gods, Baal and Asherah, and they've been worshiping these false gods that aren't the real God, and so that is always a big thing for Israel. And so as a result, there's been a 3-year drought, no rain in Israel for 3 years. And some things happen and lead up to this point where Elijah is about to do this, essentially like throw down with the false gods. There's been this challenge, and they're going up on top of this mountain, and 400 prophets of Baal, 450 prophets of Asherah are up on this hill, and they're making a sacrifice. And kind of the thing that they're saying is, whoever's God responds sooner and stronger, that must be the real God. And so for the entire day, the prophets of Baal start calling out to their God, asking their God to give them a sign, asking their God to accept the offering. Elijah starts making fun of them, like hardcore. He's like, maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he just can't hear you. So they start whipping themselves on the back, trying to get their God's attention. All of this stuff. And nothing happens. And then Elijah, it's his turn, and it's just him, really like 800-900 false prophets just up on this mountain with the city below to watch. And he builds this altar with 12 stones, puts the bowl on it, and they start soaking this joker with water. Just absolutely dousing it, so much so that it fills the trench into like a moat around the altar. And Elijah prays to God, and God sends fire down from heaven so intense that it burns up the rocks and evaporates all of the water. And in that moment, Israel starts to shift. And they start professing and worshiping God, the God that had delivered them, the God that had called them, crafted them, created them. And as a result, as a response to purify them, their nation, they gather up all of these false prophets and they kill them. And so Elijah has this moment. Just imagine being Elijah. You are up on a mountain and you have just made fun of 900 people. This room right now has about 150 people in it, maybe 120 people. Imagine it's you versus like 900 or even just 400 of the prophets of Baal. And you pray and boom, the fire comes down from the sky. That has got to feel awesome. That has got to be the coolest feeling in the world. And so they gather them all up, they kill all the prophets, and then to kind of take it to the next level, Elijah prays for rain, and the dark clouds start building over the water and come over to the land, and it's so dark it blacks out the sky, and water starts pouring down, and it's the first rain they've had. And so Elijah's God proving that he is more powerful than these prophets. He is more powerful than the drought. He is more powerful than their world. All of this stuff, and Elijah's just sitting there being like, told you so. Let's go. So the king of Israel flees from this challenge, this thing, and he starts going back to Jezebel, the queen, his wife, and wants to tell her about it. And as if God hadn't already shown himself powerful enough, the king is taking his chariot. And it says the Spirit came onto Elijah, and he outran the chariot. Dude outran horses. I am not built for speed or endurance, but he's still, like, I can't outrun anything. I bet I can't outrun half of y'all, even if, like, your shoes were tied, but he outruns horses all the way back. So just imagine the, like, spiritual high that this dude is on. For those of you that have been to Winter Chill, you think going home from Winter Chill is awesome? Imagine calling fire from the sky and outrunning horses because of God. Like, this is nuts. This is all-time power and proof and presence of God. So what happens in 1 Kings 19, verse 1 and 2, when Ahab, the king, got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way that he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the God strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Now Jezebel, she's got a bit of a reputation in many ways, but she's already killed prophets. Elijah would not be her first kill, her first contract that she has sent out for a prophet. So if you're Elijah in this moment, honestly, I would think that Elijah hears that and it's like, lady, did you not see what happened? I prayed and fire came down. I prayed and rains came down. I ran and outran your husband's chariot. Come at me, you would think. We know what it's like to have this spiritual high moment and then just kind of get smacked in the face. We know what it's like to be up here and then eventually hit bottom. And so this is what we see in the next two verses in 1 Kings. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and left his servant there. And then he went alone in the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. It's a pretty quick reversal from calling down fire from heaven to running away. So he goes to this town, Beersheba, which is the southernmost town in Judah, as far south as he could have gone. And at that point, he releases his servant. He tells his servant he could leave. Why? Because his servant was his assistant, the assistant to the prophet. When Elijah does this, what he is in practice or practically doing, I told y'all I'm preaching, come on now, this just popped. What he is doing is he is saying, I am no longer a prophet. I am taking the mantle of prophet off. I am running away from this office and this call. So you as my servant, I no longer have a need for you. There's no reason for you to leave your homeland, go home. So when he gets to the end of God's people's land, he sends his servant home and says, I'm done. And it says he travels another full day south and sits under a tree and says, God, just kill me. Which is kind of weird because it starts in verse 3, he was afraid and fled for his life. He's running to save his life, and the first thing he says to God, end me. What? And it sounds dumb, but like we know what it's like to run and try and like survive and then all of a sudden feel like it doesn't have a point. To feel like he gave up being a prophet. To feel like the thing that God put me on this earth to do, I can no longer do. Goes this full journey, done with being a prophet. But we know what it's like to run. For Elijah, He has been doing exactly what God called him to do. He has been following exactly what God laid out before him. And what did he get? A contract on his head. Students, every time we follow God doesn't mean that good things happen. Every time we follow God doesn't mean that life is going to be great. Sometimes it's just easier to run. Sometimes it's just easier to flee. And so at this point, just imagine for a second what it's like to be Elijah. You are emotionally exhausted. You just stood in front of hundreds of people and challenged everything about who they are. And not only that, because you won the challenge, those people died. You are emotionally exhausted. You are spiritually exhausted. Anytime that you pour yourself out, anytime that you just lay yourself on the line and beg for God to move, there's an energy that comes with that and an exhaustion that comes with that. He is spiritually drained. The man also just outran horses. As we see in a second, he's probably pretty physically exhausted as well. He is at the end of himself in every possible way, and the most powerful woman in their region wants him dead. Elijah is not in a good place. So let's see what God does in response. Because he doesn't ask God for help. He just says, I'm done. And here's what happened. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree, but as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. So he looked around, and there beside his head was some baked bread on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more. The journey ahead will be too much for you. So he got up and he ate and he drank. And the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave where he spent the night. We're going to leave these verses up on the screen as we kind of unpack this. But here's basically what happened. Elijah is just whining. He's just throwing a fit. God, everything is terrible. Life is awful. Nothing is good. Everything is dumb. I want to die. And what does God do? He says, why don't you take a nap? I'll make you a little snacky snack. I'm going to get you some bread, some water. You just go to sleep. And I don't want to over-spiritualize this, but I think some of the most spiritual things that we can do is take naps, sleep well, eat right. I had a professor in college tell me sometimes what a spiritual thing you can do is sleep. So when we are at the end of ourselves, there comes a point where we have to take care of ourselves. For some of you, you feel this storm around you, this storm building in your life, and you want to run away the same way Elijah did. And in reality, if you would just start going to bed before 2 o'clock in the morning, your entire world would start to change. If you would stop just eating fast food every single day and eat like a carrot once in a while, your life would start to change. Again, I don't want to over-spiritualize this, but I don't want to under-spiritualize it. God designed our bodies. God is not surprised by the fact that we need to sleep. Ohio State just did this study that I probably spent way too long reading, but they studied 31,000 athletes and members of service academies. And they found that almost 1 out of every 3 of those people that they studied had post-concussion symptoms, but no history of concussion. And they had these post-concussion symptoms due to 3 things: lack of sleep, excess of stress, and mental insecurity. Any 2 of those 3. So for those of you who stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning and wake up at 7 and stumble into class and then freak out about what you're going to do afterwards, like, you might be walking around essentially concussed because you aren't caring for the body that God gave you. So go to sleep. Ideally not in here, but sometime. Sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is exactly what God does for Elijah. Hey, go to bed. Eat something that's good for your body. And keep in mind, it's important. It says, because the journey ahead will be too much for you. And he sends him on for a 40-day journey. But I don't want to miss, taking it aside from like, go to bed, I don't want to miss this. In that moment, God knew exactly what Elijah needed. In that moment when Elijah was saying, I'm done, God didn't send this massive storm. God didn't have more fire come down from heaven like he just witnessed. God didn't part a sea in front of him. God didn't make a donkey speak before him. God didn't light a fire on a bush near him. There were none of these huge, huge displays of God's power. There was provision. God knew what Elijah needed. And as much as Elijah was running away, God even provided an avenue for him to get away, for him to retreat a little bit, for him to restore himself a little bit. It's really easy for us to feel like, God, this isn't what I need right now. But God knows exactly what we need. God knows what my soul needs. God knows what your soul needs when you are burdened and exhausted and scared and stressed and anxious. God knows exactly what your soul needs. So God gives him provision to restore him, and then provision to prepare him, to send him to Mount Sinai. And here's what happens when he gets there. Remember, 40-day journey, probably not super fun by himself. 1 Kings 19, 11, and 12. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And Elijah stood there. The Lord passed by. Oh, I think I skipped a part. Did I skip a part? Yeah, I did skip a part. Verse 19, or chapter 19, 9 through 10. I was like, oh, that doesn't seem like what he said at that moment. Okay, so let's rewind, pretend I didn't say that stuff. Okay, so he gets to the mountain, Mount Sinai, 40-day journey. What happens there? And we're back. But the Lord said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? First off, if God sends me on a 40-day journey by myself and I show up to where he leads me and he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, you did this. Like, you sent me here. What are you talking about? What am I doing here? What am I doing here? You answer that question. But Elijah replied, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They've torn down your altars and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Here is what Elijah says. I've done everything you've asked of me, and it has cost me everything, and none of it has worked, and it's all your fault. I've done what you've said, and people still broke the covenant with you. That you have not protected your people. You have not protected your name. I'm putting myself out there, and now it's going to cost me my life. I'm done. But I want to back up to this question. What are you doing here, Elijah? Anytime we see in Scripture, almost anytime we see in Scripture, God asking, who are you? Where are you? And what are you doing? It's a question of rebuke, because God already knows the answer. What God does when he uses those questions with us, it is God coming to us and saying, no. What do you think's going on? I want you to search your soul and find out what is happening. So God on this mountain, after he sends him away, after he restores him, after all of this chaos and the storm of his life and the pain, but the incredible things that he's seen God do, God whispers and says to Elijah, says, what are you doing here? What's wrong? What is the burden that is pushing you out? What is the thing that you carry that is causing you to pull away from who I have called, crafted, and designed you to be? What are you doing here? The implication in the question is not only what are you doing here, but why are you not elsewhere? And again, Elijah just spouts off and blames God and says, I was doing my part, Lord. Everything was falling apart. And now we get to what God says in response to this charge, that God doesn't even have the awareness of what's going on. Verses 11 and 12. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a gentle whisper. So he's up on this mountain, and some people argue that this is the same place that the 10 Commandments were given. God doesn't show his power. Elijah is in God's face saying, you couldn't do it. Why didn't you? Why shouldn't you? Why did I? Why is this? And all of this stuff, challenging and questioning God. And God passes by, and he's not in the big storm. He's not in the tornado. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the fire that consumes the mountain. He's not in these huge shows of strength. And those are all things that we see in Scripture. God uses earthquakes. God uses storms. God uses fire. But he's not in that. He's not in these huge shows of power because Elijah doesn't need to be reminded of God's power. Elijah just saw that. That's not what he needs right now. What he needs right now is the sound of a gentle whisper. The Hebrew there is this thin sound. It's not even like this rumble or this murmur. It's a thin sound. Elijah didn't need the power of God. Elijah didn't need the strength of God. Elijah needed the tenderness of his Creator. God knows what our soul needs. God knows what your soul needs. Before we keep going, I do feel like there's an important kind of thing in this. Not every storm that we experience in our life, and I know this kind of goes against the like theme of this entire series, not every storm that God uses in our life is something that God is like Jonah 1, hurling like a spear to hit you with. I know that God can use all of them, so it's not like bad things happen and God's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Good luck. But I think if we get too far into this theology where we look for God in every storm, we start saying like, okay, so why is this happening? God, what is it that you're trying to rebuke in me? What is it you're trying to challenge in me? What is it you're trying to purify in me? Where are you trying to lead me to? Or where am I straying? And all of this stuff. And sometimes we live in a broken world filled with sin and the results of sin. And sometimes bad things happen. Because something bad happens doesn't mean God is up on his throne and he's just like, playing darts with our life. I mean, imagine if Elijah was always looking for God in the storm and always assumed that God was there. And the mountain catches fire. And I don't know about you, but if a mountain catches fire, that feels like a big deal. And he would have known the story of Moses with the bush that caught fire. And if he's looking for God in every single storm, he could have immediately and very naturally been like, oh, Moses only got a bush. I got me a mountain. Let's go, God. And he goes out there and burns to pieces. Like, I don't know how the story ends if he's looking for God in every storm. There are some things that just happen. Not saying God's not in control, not saying God's not sovereign, but I don't want us to just assume that every single thing is this huge symbol from God specifically for us, because the other thing is if Elijah goes out in the storm and assumes that God is in the storm instead of waiting for God, he misses what he really needs in the first place. He misses that thin sound. He misses the tenderness of God. So God meets him in this whisper when Elijah is angry and mad and scared and anxious. And he meets him with a whisper. And so he hears this whisper outside of the cave, and in verse 13 and 14, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" What we see Elijah answer is the same thing, but when you start to dive in, a lot of scholars argue that it is a different tone. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied again, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They've torn down your altars. They've killed all of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and they're trying to kill me too. God knew why Elijah was at the mountain. God led him to this point. And he still asks, why are you here? What has burdened you so much? And he knows the answer. What has hurt you and scared you so much? And he knows the answer. What has pulled you away from who I have created you to be? And he knows the answer. And Elijah says, you can see it there. He says, I'm doing everything I can, Lord. I'm doing what you called me to do. And what has it done? It has brought death and destruction everywhere. God's response, I think, is really interesting, and I want to read it, and then we'll leave it on the screen, and it's not going to seem interesting, but what you're going to see, and what I would love to show you, is the love and the tenderness and the grace in God's response when Elijah answers the question, what are you doing here? Verses 15 through 18. And the Lord told him, go back the way that you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive there, anoint Hazael, the king of Aram. And then anoint Jehu, the grandson of Nimshi, to be the king of Israel, and anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat, from the town of Abed-Meholah, and to Meolah, to replace you as my prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. Yet I will preserve 7,000 members in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. I told you you're not going to hear that and be like, oh, God's so tender. You'd be like, man, why are we doing history? Like, I don't understand. I don't care who these people are. As the band comes up, I want to show you why this is such a tender, caring, loving response that was exactly what Elijah's soul needs in that moment. Remember, Elijah has seen God do incredible things. He knows God's power. He has lived in the toughest, most tense moments. He has held fast to who God is and saw these moments where things could go well, and then it all started to fall apart. His life was in danger. All of his friends have died, and he doesn't know if he can keep doing it anymore. Essentially feels like a failure in what God has called him to do. And so God tells him these 5 things in this response. Just go back the way that you came. Remember when Elijah came out of Judah, he left and was in practice taking off the mantle, the name tag of prophet. And God says, go back the way that you came. That's God saying, I am not done with you. He doesn't say sneak back in. He doesn't say go on and live your life. He says go back to where it came, this rebirth of who Elijah has always been called to be, because God has not finished his work in him. And then the next part that we see is to go anoint the king of Aram or Aram. That's a different country. That is not Israel. God is saying, I'm sending you, my prophet, to go announce a king of a nation that isn't Israel. What God is doing is reminding Elijah in this moment, I am still in control. Even though the rest of the world feels like it is falling apart, I still put the kings in their throne. I still control what happens. There is nothing in or beyond Israel, beyond my people, that I am not aware of and involved with. He's reminding Elijah, you feel like I've lost control, but there is no such thing. And then he says, anoint Jehu to be the next king of Israel. In this moment, it would have been easy to assume that God had broken the covenant with Israel because Israel had broken the covenant with him. It would have been easy to assume God was done with his people because everyone had turned away. They were worshiping false gods. They were murdering his prophets. And so it would have been easy to say, okay, this is the end of the road for Israel. This is the end of the road for God's people, for God's work on earth. And God says, no, I am not through. I am not through with my people. I am not through with my work, with my promise that I made centuries before. There's another king, go anoint him. And then he tells him to go find Elisha, this young man that he will find farming in a field. And he says, he's going to be the next prophet. He's your protege. Not only am I not done with you, Elijah, not only am I not done with this world, not only am I not done using Israel, I'm not done speaking, guiding, and directing its activities. I'm not done purifying my people. I'm not done guiding and begging my people towards righteousness. You feel like you're done? You feel like I'm through? You feel like I have lost control over everything? I have gone nowhere. I am still on my throne. And this last piece about these 7,000 others in Israel. One of the things Elijah keeps going back to is they've killed everybody. There's nobody left who loves you, God, because that is one thing Satan loves to convince us of. When we are exhausted, when we are tired, when we are at the end of our run, Satan loves to convince us that you are alone in following him. So what's the point? There's nobody left. God knows what Elijah needs. He knows what his soul needs. And he says, there are thousands of others that I am protecting and guarding, and I am not through. God knows what our soul requires. God knows what our soul is burdened by. God knows the weight that you carry and what causes it better than you know of yourself. It is so easy to convince ourselves that I'm just going to grit and bear it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to deal with it on my own. God, this isn't what I need right now. And the whole time, God just calling out to us, why are you here? Just tell me, what is your burden? What is your fear? What is your doubt? What are you anxious about me, about your life, about your future, about this world, about anything? So here's what we're going to do as we wrap up. Life is really, really, really hard. For some of you, it isn't yet. For some of you, it has been for some time. But I know that in a room with this many high school students, there are some burdens. There is some fear, there is some anxiety that you are carrying that God already knows about, that he is not surprised about, he doesn't think less of you for, but we continue to carry it because this just isn't what I need right now. I don't want to deal with it, and if I start dealing with it, I don't know what's going to happen. But here's what I want to do. I just want y'all to go ahead and bow your heads and close your eyes right where you are. I want you to think about the stress in your life. Think about the things that you are anxious about, the things that you feel like maybe you don't want anyone else to know that is going on in your life, whether that is doubts or sin or pain or hurt or anything else. And I want you to imagine, with your head bowed and your eyes closed, that Jesus is kneeling right in front of you. And he just puts his hands on both of your shoulders. And he says, why are you here? What is it that you're carrying? What is pulling you away from who I've created you to be? We're going to leave some space, but I just, with your head bowed, eyes closed, just imagining what it's like for Jesus to rest his hands on your shoulders. I want you to answer that question. Why are you here?